While I'm at it, I thought I would make y'all a um, video talking about our second paper prompt. I think there are a couple of key ideas in here that I ought to spend a few minutes on to make sure that we're all on the same page. So, our second paper for the class is going to be primarily focused on composing a summary and a critical or a strong response to a source of your choice. Um, the first couple of chapters of our textbook, as we will hopefully see, should be helpful in this way. That's what I've got a little reminder up here at the top. But also, not also, I want to talk about the source. So in past classes, previous semesters, I have picked out a handful of sources and let y'all choose from among them. In some ways, that works rather well for our class. And I'll have to say here, I've got a note, this is down in the second paragraph here. If you want some help selecting a source, just let me know, just email me. Otherwise, I'd much prefer leave it up to you to select a source that's meaningful to you to write about. Now, keep in mind, this should be a source that lends itself to a couple of things. That there is enough content, enough material that you can effectively summarize it. And we'll be talking about summary here over the next couple weeks, and that you could respond to it strongly or critically, again, which we'll be talking about over the next few weeks. That is to say, can you generate 3 or 4 or 5 pages worth of writing about your source? Now, it might seem like a lot, especially to write about one source, but keep in mind, you're going to have some sort of introductory paragraph or page. You're going to have a summary, which think of that as about a half a page at least, something like that. You have a concluding portion of your paper, which is another half a page to a page. So really, what are you being asked to do? You're being asked to fill up those remaining couple of 2 or 3 pages with strong response or critical response. So what do I mean by that? I've highlighted a section here in yellow um, that I think is important. This is not the only way to complete this assignment. This is just, if you're not familiar with this kind of writing, if you're not inclined this way, naturally, um, it might be helpful for you to pick out a source, pick out an article that you happen to disagree with. In other words, what we'll find is that strong response or critical response basically means you have something to say about it. Now, if you pick an article that you happen to very much agree with, or you find very resonant in that way, and that you support and that you stand behind, what you might find yourself doing is responding in ways that you're just affirming what you find in the source. In other words, you're preaching to the choir, as they say. And it's not that it's impossible or bad or wrong or any of that stuff to write that way. You just may find that you don't have a lot to say in critical or strong response. You want to have a lot of because statements. In other words, if you pick an article, let's say that you are, I don't know, for example, you are against the proliferation of artificial intelligence, and you find an article that is also against the proliferation of artificial intelligence. Your paper might end up looking like a bunch of paragraphs saying, see, I told you so. See, this is what this source says. See, I agree with them here. Again, not wrong or bad. It looks a lot different, and it comes across a lot different than if you were to take that same stance being against the proliferation of artificial intelligence and finding an article that sings its praises, that thinks it's the greatest thing ever. because then you can move down paragraph by paragraph and say, oh no, this is all wrong right here. I think this is wrong and the author is wrong because. Oh, see this paragraph here? Oh no, it's all bad because. Oh, and this paragraph here, there's no way. No, we should never let that happen because you'll have a lot to say about something that you happen to disagree with. Um, and so choose a topic and a source that's meaningful to you. You know, what things are going on in your life that you feel like you can already talk about at length, that you like to talk about, that, you get together with your friends or your family members, or even in your own, spare time, personal time, and you read about and you talk about. It could be any hot button issue of today. It could be something that you're passionate about, something that you're studying for, your major. A lot of students will write about cultural and social things, everything from, immigration to firearms to artificial intelligence, bioethics, all sorts of things. So, um, whatever is resonant to you and you feel like you've already have something to say about it, find a source and preferably find one that you find disagreeable so that you could speak back to it. We'll be using that a lot. Speaking back, imagining the source is somebody that you're having a debate with, or that you think they're just completely misguided, and you want to speak back to them. You want to have something to say to that person. So that's what's going on when it comes to helping us select a source. Um, let's see, what do we got here? This paragraph is just it's just talking a little bit about what we've already said. You're going to be summarizing and responding strongly. There are different strategies or approaches. We'll probably touch on that here in a week or two. But this is the other part of the prompt that I wanted to show you. So we're going to have an introductory paragraph. Here are some of the main elements. This is not everything that could or should go into an intro, but these are some of the things I'm going to be looking for. Most effective introductions will have these things. In addition to the intro, you'll have some sort of summary of your source. Again, these are all things that we're going to hopefully be going over here in the next few weeks, so don't feel like you need to know all this right at this moment. And then you'll have response paragraphs. You see this here, plural, not just one paragraph, hopefully. You'll have many things to say in speaking back to your source and responding strongly or responding critically, and you'll have a concluding paragraph. We're going to go back up there in a second, but I just want to point a few things out here. I'll have these in all my prompts, and they're usually sprinkled throughout the class, but um, different references to our style guide or preferred style guides or formatting, but then also some resources you can use to help with that, whether the Writing Lab or the Writing Center or online resources like the Purdue OWL. Here are some also administrative things. Yeah, let's talk about this for a second. Um, I don't really like doing word counts. I really don't like doing counts of any kind, pages or words. But I think it's important to have at least a ballpark idea in mind. What do I mean here by these page limits? So here's a little bit about that. Most students who successfully respond to the second paper prompt and effectively compose a second paper, they take more than 3 full pages. In other words, I can't remember the last time I've seen a student write a successful second paper in fewer than 3 full pages. Um, and this doesn't, please don't, please try not to interpret this as, stretching out your line spacing and narrowing your margins and doing those kinds of things. MLA format, double spacing, 1 inch margins, 12 points font, all of that with proper headings, 3 full pages at least. Try to aim for that. Try your best. Um, and then if you find yourself writing, more than 6 or 7 or more pages, I'm not going to grade you down for it. It's just that you may be writing more than you need to, which I'm fine with. I would love to read it, but I understand that you all have lives and you don't need to be taking up more time than you need to. So about 5 pages, 5 full pages in that ballpark. That's a good um, mark to aim for. Again, try not to become consumed with this. It's not that important, but just so you have an idea, if you come away with your rough draft, your first draft, and it's a page long, you're probably, I'd probably point out a number of places in your paper that you could develop more. That kind of thing. That's the idea here with pages. And here's the due date. If you have any questions about this, obviously, please reach out to me. We can talk about it some more. I want to go back up here to these elements. The main things I want to focus on, um, I want to say something briefly about an intro. We'll talk more about introductions as the course unfolds over the semester. But for here, what I'd like you to do is make sure when you first start your paper off in that first part of your introductory paragraph, try to set up some context. Try to try to do what's called situating your reader. In other words, set them up and prepare them for the discussion that you're about to have. A lot of times it's really easy that it'll happen that we have discussions, we have the setup, we have the context going on in our thinking. In other words, we have why does it matter? Why is this important? Why should anybody care about this topic like I care about it? That's all going on in our heads. And a lot of times we neglect to put that down on the page. Try to do some of that in the first, I don't know, let's say handful of sentences at least in your introductory paragraph. You want to introduce your source, or here I call it an artifact, your text. Introduce it with, talk about the author a little bit, talk about where you found it, why is any of that important or not. Maybe you can mention, you don't have to go into great detail, but mention things like maybe what's the main point of the article, what's the author's message or argument, things like that. Just, again, helping your reader understand what is going on in this paper. And you finish off with take your best shot at a thesis statement. Again, this is something we're going to be working on all semester, so don't feel like you have to be an expert at it at this point. Um, but you'll want to express a main point of your paper, what it's about summarizing and responding strongly to a source. So you'll want to, if you're criticizing, again, going back to our AI example, if you're criticizing the AI phenomenon, and think that it should be banned or something like that, say so. Have a sentence or so. Be very clear about your point of view. Maybe offer up some reasons why you think that. All in a sentence. You don't have to go into super great detail, but offer a sentence that could sort of encapsulate what you're going to do here in your paper. And we'll talk about thesis statements more, don't worry. When you summarize your article or your source, try to refrain um, from subjective writing. Try to remain objective. In other words, if you have opinions or analytical remarks or insights along those lines, try to save those for your response paragraphs. Um, when you're summarizing, try to just stick to the almost like you see on news reporting. Who, what, when, where, why, how, all that. What is it? What's going on? Who's it about? What's happening in your source? What are the elements? What's notable, not in the sense that it resonates with you so much, but what's notable in the sense that the author included particular examples or um, seems to adopt a particular approach, things like that. Um, that's where I have it here. Try not to include your own insights. That'll be for later. When you summarize, especially a text, start at the beginning. Use numerical or chronological transitions. First, in the first part of the article, this, next that, then this, finally that. So those are some signal phrases or chronological transitions. You'll want to use what are called authorial tags or um, attributive tags. You'll want to take many opportunities to point out that the author thinks this and the source says that. That way you can distinguish your own personal take on things compared to what the source is actually saying. These are all practices of summary writing, which we'll hopefully get good practice with all semester. Um, a lot of times you'll find that people who teach summary, they don't want you, they say that direct quotations or paraphrases don't belong in summaries. They don't. I agree with it, but I want you to do it anyway. I want you to get some practice at this. And if you come across some passage, some quote from your source that you think is particularly relevant or important or serves as an example of what you claim is going on with your source, go ahead and include it and try your best to use proper citation. Um, Again, this is a little bit of a difference I take on summary writing when I teach it. So understand that this is pretty unorthodox, but I think it's good practice for us for now. All right, and the last thing I really want to talk about, because we'll talk about conclusions later, is in your response paragraphs. So there's a number of ways that you could go about speaking back or responding strongly or critically to your article. You may want to just respond to the substance, the subject matter. You know, again, if to use our AI example, if your author is completely for AI and offers up numerous examples of why it's such a great thing, but you find yourself totally disagreeing and you think it's all bad, use a paragraph to discuss each individual point. In other words, try not to compose big long paragraphs where you dump a bunch of examples into one paragraph. Or, for that matter, um, listing very briefly in short, brief paragraphs a bunch of different ways that that you find the author disagreeable or the source disagreeable. As you go over your source, pick out a handful, three or four or five maybe, examples that really stand out as things that you want to take issue with, as things that you want to speak back to, and you want to offer your own insight and critique and analysis of why and how they are misguided or incorrect or just otherwise wrong. So when you're planning your paper, use a single paragraph to discuss each of these three or four or five points that you want to talk about. So the body of your essay, of your second paper, might contain three or four or five separate body paragraphs. In each paragraph, again, you're talking about one element at a time. And you'll use a number of sentences. Let's say 10 sentences. There's no rule for this. But give yourself enough room. Use half a page or more. Give yourself plenty of room to fully articulate why it is you selected the point from your source, why it is you find it disagreeable, what about it is exactly wrong, why is this important, why is it relevant. Maybe you want to discuss the idea of rhetoric. You know, you could say something like this author is using emotionally charged examples to try and convince the readers that they're right. Well, you can point that out and say, you know, that's a nice try, but I see right through your rhetoric, and here's why I still think you're wrong. You know, that kind of approach. try to, if you find yourself saying, no, I disagree with this person and I think I'm right, the end, try to go beyond that. Try to imagine somebody reading your paper and saying, tell me why you think that. Tell me how that works exactly. When you are disagreeing or when you are speaking back to your source, make sure you fully elaborate, fully expand your thoughts. Okay. Um, I wanted this to be brief. I think I've said enough for now. If you have any questions about any of this, um, you know where to find me. Just email me or office hours, or we can meet up virtually. Um, until then, this is your second paper. All right.